The world of Magic the Gathering is abuzz right now, aflame with curiosity about the brand new Spellbook format and its mysterious creator. Well, I have the inside scoop, so shut up and watch.
This is the intro for the Hatcher show. He didn't want to do nothing, so he's standing there.
All right, my friends, here's the deal. I know what's going down with the Spellbook format. You want to know what the deal is. I know the guy behind it all. In fact, he's sponsoring this video. So, I'm going to give you the full details about him. People are already circulating all kinds of wild rumors. Who is this madman? Does he work for Wizards of the Coast? Well, I'll give you the facts after we talk about the format.
The creator of the Spellbook format is a man by the name of TC, and we'll talk more about him at the end of the video. But for now, we're going to start out with the rule set that TC sent over to me. Here's how it works. You build an exactly 40 card deck. You put up to 3 copies of any given card in there. You can have any number of basic lands, but anything else, only 3 copies. You play with your deck in your hand. In brackets, it says deck equals hand. You can skip your draw phase. You shuffle before resolving effects like mill or surveil. Now, in terms of bans and restrictions, there's only one card that's restricted, Mox Amber. You can only play with 1 copy of it. There is no ban list under the hopes that degenerate decks will keep each other in check. So overall, this is a fan format with some pretty straightforward rules. I think this concept is a lot of fun because it reminds me of the earliest days of Magic the Gathering. When I used to go to the LGS, the store owner would always come up with these crazy formats. Every single week, there would be something different. It might be you can only build your deck out of cards from one artist, something along those lines. It was always different, and it pushed you into different deck building areas. And this feels the same way, just put together by somebody who wants to have a good time with Magic. Maybe not everything is fleshed out, but here we go. Here's the starting point. So when I looked at this, I had the same mentality I used to have back in the LGS days. How do I exploit this format for easy wins? And the answer to me was, well, you can skip your draw phase. Why is that? Because your entire deck is in your hand. And if you don't skip your draw phase, you'll lose right away, because one of the rules of Magic is when there are no cards left in your deck for you to draw, you lose. So instantly I went, well, this format is straight up about forcing your opponent to draw a card and then you win. And I thought what would be even more fun than that is if I just pulled out Flump and I was like, yo, if you do anything I don't like, I'm gonna shock my Flump. Guess what? We both draw a card. We'll die together. It's the kind of crazy insanity I used to do back in the day. I would build decks around Divine Intervention meant to tie the game. So it's right up my alley. But then record scratch. I get an email from TC saying, okay, I didn't actually explain everything properly. When it comes to your deck being your hand, if you're going to run out of cards and be forced to draw, that has to happen after your entire deck is gone. And that explains the rule about shuffling your hand before resolving effects like mill and surveil. So ultimately, I was disappointed that my initial shenanigan concept wasn't going to work out. So after being devastated by the news that I couldn't flump it up, I went all the way back in time to the beginning of Magic, because I was actually talking with some friends about this and thought about how it would work if this is how the game started. And the first card I thought of from way back in the day was Black Vice. This card was horrific. If somebody put this out against you on the first turn, you were going to eat 3 damage to the face, and basically that would happen turn after turn if you couldn't get your hand size down. But in a format where you start with a 40 card deck, you draw your 7 cards, you have 33 cards left. I play the Black Vice and I tell you to go, and then you take like 30 damage and you're done. You just instantly die after I play this one casting cost artifact. But then I realized that that's actually the slow game if this was old school versions of Spellbook, because you can win instantly by just using Spirit Guides and Stormseeker. You remove the Spirit Guides from your hand to get the mana to cast the Stormseeker, and Stormseeker deals damage to your opponent equal to the number of cards in their hand. So they get wrecked. It's the same concept. And so, because I enjoyed that so much mentally, I actually spent a few hours going over all of the rares and mythics and some of the uncommons and commons as well, looking for fun cards that might give the same kind of vibe. And the closest thing that I could find was Fateful Showdown. It actually turns from being a Garbo card into a powerhouse one-shot win, which is great. But there are some other red cards that aren't quite as direct, but are still pretty powerful. Collective Defiance, for one, actually feels pretty busted now that I think about it. 3 mana, and you make your opponent lose their entire hand, right? They discard their entire hand, and then they go to draw a new hand worth. So, oh, look at you. You had 30 cards in your hand. Discard them. Draw 30 cards. Oh, where's your deck? There isn't one because your hand was your deck. So this just turns into your cards are gone. Go ahead, draw a card, you lose. And it's only 3 mana. That feels super strong. If you're going to play decks that aren't quite as powerful and aren't quite trying to win that quickly and want to do more flashy stuff, you can do some fun nonsense with Neheb the Dreadhorde Champion. You have to actually get him out and swing with him, which slows things down, and then you can pitch a whole bunch of cards from your hand for mana to do big flashy effects with the other side of it. So you still get a big payoff, but without having to go as hard to start with and giving your opponents a little more room to breathe. Because when it comes to this kind of a format, I feel like the only way it can really work is if you have a similar concept to Commander, where you agree ahead of time what kind of power rules you're going to go by, or it's going to need some stronger ban and restricted list concepts. Because after going over everything, I don't think you're going to find a natural balance here. Things are all over the board, right? Like when you move over into green, you can find some interesting cards for the format in terms of things like Joel Rail, who directly cares about the size of your hand and can make giant tokens out of it, right? You've got Sage of Ancient Lore, who can just be a gigantic beefy boy on your side based on the size of your hand. But then there's also some other cards that benefit from the fact that you have all of your cards in your hand. A great example of that is Pelt Collector. This is a lot of value for 1 mana, right? You get a 1/1, and if you can progressively put out bigger creatures, then you can constantly grow this and get a lot of power out of the card and have it run the distance. So when you get to have all of the cards in your starting hand, you don't have to run as many copies of particular cards to make sure you have them along the sequence. So you can basically reduce your redundancy. And that benefits you as well for cards like In Search of Greatness, which also really love moving up the chain step by step this way. Now, when you look at black, you've got some fun options in terms of discarding your cards. So Pack Rat can get silly, where you can make a whole bunch of goofy rats. You can use Gix, I feel like, to some pretty dirty effect overall with the amount of cards that you can feed to them and then take from your opponents. Rotting Regisaur just becomes a straight up way better card when you have a gigantic hand like that, and the discarding a card becomes essentially meaningless, right? And then you can turn cards like Awaken the Erstwhile into an instant win. Well, not instant win, but on your next turn or your opponent's next turn, you're going to win the same way that Collective Defiance does, but slower. You can also do weird stuff like Bolus's Citadel, where now, because your deck is your hand, when you wanted to use the Citadel, you would shuffle your hand to reveal a random card, and then you could play that card from your hand with no mana, instead paying life. So that is definitely a different concept. The powerhouse level of the Marches from Kamigawa cannot be denied. having a whole ton of cards that you can feed to something like this really does amp up the power. And on the converse side, because I did go over so many cards, there were some things that I found that were just genuinely awful. Like Castle Lochthwain, for example. It normally, the concept is get your hand down to as few cards as possible, activate it to draw a card, take a little bit of punishment. But trying to use this in this mode, it's just going to end you. Activate this land once and you're just going to lose. That made me laugh. But there are ways you can take advantage of it on the converse side, where, for example, clues suck in this format because they're just an artifact that says pay 2 mana, sacrifice, draw a card, right? You're not going to want to do that. But giving your opponents clues, so if you use Declaration in Stone or Fateful Absence, which are pretty powerful removal spells that are balanced out by giving your opponent a clue, well, now all of a sudden, the downside is nothing. It says, remove your opponent's best creature or planeswalker. Oh yeah, what do they get in return? This lump that they can pay 2 mana to sacrifice. Oh yeah, what happens when they sacrifice it? Absolutely nothing, unless they have something that triggers on artifacts leaving play. It has no inherent ability because card draw is irrelevant, right? So that amps that up. On top of that, now that we're talking about white's leyline would be bonkers in this. Oh, straight up, I have it in my starting hand. I get to put it out for free because that's how ley lines work. There's multiple ley lines that you would want to rock. They're just straight up, hey, if you're tossing out the blue one, all your stuff has flash. You put out the white one, you can't be targeted. It's nutty. Another tweak on this craziness comes with Approach of the Second Sun. How it's normally supposed to work is after you cast it, you put it back in your deck, you wait until it shows back up, you cast it again, you win. But in this case, your deck's your hand. So as soon as you cast it, you put it back in your hand. And since you cast it, you already have the mana, obviously, to be able to cast it again next turn. So it's going to speed things up in that regard. Now, clearly, the color that's going to have the most fun with a full mid of cards is blue, right? Because it has the cards that take advantage of that the most. You can go big Insanity if you want to go with Omniscience and be like, yo, I can cast all my spells. Now, yes, Omniscience has a huge casting cost, but we're living in crazy dreamland, letting our format concept run away with us here, right? You can go commence the end game and make the biggest zombie armies imaginable. You can do silliness like Fae of Wishes, which becomes really good in terms of, yo, look at all these cards I have to pitch from my hand to be able to keep putting this out and getting more cards from outside the game, right? Like, this is absolutely sweet. And there's one blue card that would actually show up in everybody's deck, and that would be Pact of Negation, because you can cast it for free. It's a blue counterspell. You'll have it ready on hand for situations where you need it to force through your win on whatever turn, or where it's just you have to stop your opponent no matter what, and somehow maybe you can pay the upkeep costs or whatever. But either way, they would be in tons of decks. Blue has a nice step ladder, the same way that we talked about Pelt Collector and In Search of Greatness in the form of As Foretold. That works out really well. You get a fun concept as well with Narcomoeba, where Narcomoeba normally, if it goes from your deck to the graveyard, then it comes into play, right? But since your hand is your deck now, if somebody was to make you discard the Narcomoeba to your graveyard, it actually went from your deck to the graveyard. So it would go into play. And that's a fun little change of the rules. And I think a really fun finisher for blue is Folio of Fancies. It's not something that would normally be considered a finisher. So I like that vibe. And then when it comes to artifacts, you've got things like Awakened Amalgam finally getting a chance to shine. It's like, all right, normally you're not that hot, but you can do something in this format. Psychosis Crawler is a big fat daddy that anybody can run. And Argenta Masticore is an absolute house because he basically, as you pitch cards to him, you're going to have all the different options of casting costs in your deck so you can get best effect out of that destruction ability, which is really solid. And conversely, on the junk side, Cosmos Elixir is the worst in this format, where if your life is less than 20, it's going to give you 2 life and let you scry for 1. But other than that, once you're above your starting life total, it's going to say draw a card, but you already have all your cards. So it's a hugely expensive piece of garbage. Now, that wraps up all the individual cards that I wanted to talk about. Overall, I think this is a fun format that does have some big flaws that need to be addressed. One of the biggest is not having a banned or like a restricted list. You need more than just restricting Mox Amber, because degeneracy never really cancels it out, because it never comes in at the same strength. Combos will be at different levels of strength. That kind of thing will always be the case in Magic. There will always be the best deck, and there won't always be a deck that can answer it, especially when you're dealing with a smaller card pool like Historic. So you do have that major issue. This format will be plagued with combos because it is everything a combo deck wants. It's access to guaranteed land drops, it's access to every single piece of your combo, and it's access to everything you need to get your combo running, right? And on top of that, you can basically do it all in one turn, pull it off, backed up by Pact of Negations and other counter magic to force it all through. Combat heavy decks, things like that, they'll take multiple turns to get their win through and won't be able to protect it the same way. So I feel like combo decks really will benefit from this format overall. Now, if you're somebody who finds it frustrating to never hit your land drops, you always missing land drops or getting land flooded, this is going to solve that. In terms of deck building, you're actually probably only going to need to put 7 or 8 lands in your deck in total, right? Because unless your opponent's destroying your lands, you're not going to need to have 1/3 of your entire deck being lands or more just to guarantee you get the lands that you need. So you definitely have that on your side. Also, you never have to wait for the cards you want to play to show up. So you have that benefit. The downside is the removal of variance has a couple of different issues. One is it makes it definitely more skill intensive. The more skilled player is going to win out because there are going to be fewer things to trip them up. A lot of games of Magic, when you lose them, come down to 2 things. Either getting hosed by variance, where you don't get the things you need, or making mistakes. The better a player is, the fewer mistakes they make, the fewer opportunities their opponents have to capitalize on. So when you take that and remove variance as something that can give you a win, like basically when people sit down to a game of Magic, there's a chance for both players to win. With this format, that would not always be the case. You lose the variance and it would be very samey. You're going to have a very similar experience over and over. It's going to be refined down to that. So it's going to be up to you to infuse more variance into it in terms of maybe using a larger variety of cards in your deck or something to maybe reduce the monotony, because you'll have the exact same line of play every game dictated by your strategy and only influenced by your opponent's answers to that strategy. And because of this setup, your opponent will always have any answers that they have available to what you're doing. So variance doesn't work in your favor either. And that can be a big knock against the format. I feel like this is Magic Light. This is something that in a lot of ways is just easier to deal with, but ultimately doesn't have the depth that full-on Magic the Gathering does, and absolutely would need you to sit down and have those commander level discussions about power with the people you're playing it with. Having this as a larger organized format seems like it would be difficult to manage and definitely would require a heavy hand when it comes to bannings and restrictions, because literally you just have a situation where everybody has access to everything. And that's not what Magic is really built on. But it does remove the biggest frustrations of Magic, which is variance, making it feel like you're not actually getting to play Magic. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a format that you can have fun with, but is going to be just filled with degenerate combo insanity, and the games will end faster and faster as newer cards enter into the historic card pool, right? That's overall what we're looking at here. Now, I said we would talk about TC, as there are rumblings that he is working for Wizards of the Coast and this is some secret strategy of theirs. Well, I have bad news for you, friends. TC is just an everyday Magic enthusiast who is super excited about his own format and wanted videos made about it to spread the word. And that's why I got involved. I've actually known TC since before he even went by that name and set up his own YouTube channel. But let me explain to you that when it came to this sponsorship, he didn't even ask me to mention him. I had to go, oh wait, yeah, I'm supposed to say this is a sponsored video. How would you like me to reference you? And he's like, oh, you can mention my YouTube channel, unless you don't want to do that because it wouldn't be okay to mention another YouTube channel on your YouTube channel. And I told him, bro, I'm subscribed publicly to your channel on my channel. It would be the highest level of insanity for me to be like, no, I don't want to mention your channel as the sponsor. So he has a Magic channel. He's over there opening up his booster packs and having a good time. He loves Magic so much that he paid me to make this video because he just wants you to play this format and try it out if it's going to be fun and wanted my opinion. That's it. That's pure love of Magic. So if you appreciate that, head on over to TC's channel. Give him a subscribe and a hello. Give him a little tickle down in the comment section from me. Tell him Hatcha said hello. Big thank you to TC for sponsoring this video. I spent a number of hours poring over cards and just feeling genuine nostalgia because this is just a pure love of Magic product. Or not product. This is just a pure love of Magic project, and I am super happy to have been a part of it. Anyways, I'm done. So get on up out of here. Go say hello to TC for me.